Thank you for being here. My name is Stephanie. I am a nurse at the medical center here in Traverse City. Have been a nurse there for over 20 years. Let's just say that. So you're here today to learn about advanced care planning. And one of the things that I do want to show you is I'm going to give you a lot of information today. And you may find that when we're done with the workshop, that you forgot a good percentage of what I told you. And that's okay. I do want to share with you, if you go to the Munson Healthcare website, to the patient and visitors section, you'll find advanced care planning. And everything that I'm going to talk with you about today is going to be in this website. So if you can't remember things, you can refer back to the website. So like I said, I have been a nurse at Munson Medical Center for a very, very long time. And the majority of my career has been as an intensive care unit nurse. And it is in that role where I really discovered the need and importance of advanced care planning. I never cared for a patient who planned to be there. I shouldn't say never, rarely did I care for a patient who planned to be there. And I've witnessed a lot of circumstances where families had done some planning, or at least had some conversations about, what if this happens to me? What would I want, or what wouldn't I want? But more commonly, a lot of circumstances where no conversations have been had, or families are really left to guess what we should or shouldn't be doing, what kinds of decisions the patient would want, because the patient is in a position where they're unable to make their own decisions. And so that's what we're really going to talk a lot about today, is preparing for those what if moments. If something were to happen where you were either suddenly injured, let's say in a car accident, or an unanticipated stroke, or some type of medical emergency that would put you in a position where you're not able to make your own medical decisions. And so that is what we commonly refer to as advanced care planning. That's the term you hear it used. And there's two primary roles of advanced care planning. So obviously it's a mechanism for you to have conversations not only with your doctors and your nurses, but also your loved ones about what's important to you. What are the things that matter most? What kinds of circumstances would you describe as providing a good quality of life, versus circumstances where you may say, that's where my quality of life would be diminished. And even as far as saying certain circumstances where you may say, I would be okay with being allowed to die in this circumstance versus being kept alive. And so those are a lot of the things that we will discuss with regards to advanced care planning. And I commonly refer to that as the what. So what would your decisions be? The other important part of advanced care planning is identifying who. So who do you trust most to carry out your treatment preferences and decisions? And we're in a little bit of a unique circumstance in Michigan, because most states have legislation that defines who gets to speak for who. Michigan is not one of those states. We don't have what some states have as referred to as a family consent law or next of kin law. Michigan has what's referred to as a patient advocate statute, which means you have to choose in a legal document who you trust most to speak for you. I do think there are certainly some pros and cons to that legislation. But more often than not, what we find is there's a large percentage of patients that have never filled out any kind of legal document, such as an advance directive, which leaves them without having somebody to speak for them. And we find ourselves in those situations having to go to the court and have the court appoint a guardian. It's a very cumbersome process. And so it's very important for you to participate in advanced care planning early, because we never know what may happen but it also saves that stress or burden down the road should you find yourself in a position where you can't make your own decisions and the doctors and nurses need somebody to step into that role and then having to go to the court. So everybody has some documents and I'm going to kind of pull them up here on the website for those of you that are on Zoom. The first thing that you will find is the Advanced Care Planning Workbook. So you'll see that these documents look similar, but they serve two different purposes. So one is the Advanced Care Planning Workbook, which is a step-by-step guide for helping you to put your medical wishes in writing. This is another document that, again, you can refer back to after the workshop to say, gosh, what did she say about that? Or I can't remember. So you'll find a lot of information in here. And that's essentially what I am following today. And then last but not least, the directive. So we're going to go through this at the tail end of the workshop so you know how to fill out the legal document correctly, to designate who you trust most and outline what your treatment preferences would be. So if you're following along in the workbook here, you'll see on page 2, we kind of talked a little bit about what advanced care planning is. So now let's talk a little bit about why we all need one. And again, like I said before, it's very difficult to predict when something may happen in one person's life. And some of you may have experienced circumstances with your own loved ones or family members where there's been a sudden illness or maybe a tragic accident that's left them in a position of really needing somebody to advocate for them and speak for them. And so historically, what we've done with advanced care planning is it's tended to be more focused on end of life planning. And I really think that it's unfortunate that we're waiting to have these conversations to that point. And a lot of times what we find is it's too late by that point. So we're really encouraging folks to start this process very early and as early as 18. So when everybody turns 18, we strongly encourage you to start talking about this, start having conversations, especially if it's an individual who might be leaving the home to go to college. What if something would happen to that person while they're away at college? And do they have some type of document that says, who do they trust most? And what would be their treatment preferences at that time? So we're really encouraging folks to start this early at the age of 18, regardless of health status, because that's the other common reason I hear people say that they haven't done their advanced care planning either, is because they're healthy. There's nothing wrong with them. They feel great. And I'd argue that's a really great time to have some of these conversations, because you don't have the stress of not feeling well or having other kinds of medical complications. So again, the advanced directive is a term, kind of more of a broad term for what these legal documents are. Other terms for these documents are referred to as a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And another term is a patient advocate designation. So just know that whether you have one of those 3 documents, they're treated the exact same. So let's say, for example, you're scheduled to have surgery and your surgeon says, I need you to have I'd appreciate if you'd have an advanced directive prior to your surgery, just in case something were to happen. And you have a durable power of attorney for healthcare, you're covered. It's the same thing. We treat them the same way. So you don't have to have both. You may have at one point been given a 5 wishes. You may have a couple of them unfilled out in a drawer at home, right? How many? See? Yeah, exactly. And so the 5 wishes, again, is another type of advanced directive. There's lots of them out there. I personally really like the Henry Ford Health advanced directive that they have on their website. Munson uses the Making Choices Michigan advanced directive, which is out of Grand Rapids. Lots of options out there. Another great one that you could Google is Prepare for Your Care. Very simple, very easy to fill out. So you don't necessarily have to choose the one that Munson gives you. You can use whatever one you want. This is just the one that we've chosen to adopt and give out to the community. So like I said before, who needs one? We really encourage anybody 18 and older, regardless of health status, to complete an advanced directive. Because the nice thing is you will update them as you age, as things happen in life, because your goals may change. And so it's very common for that to happen. So as I mentioned earlier, one part of the advanced directive is to know who you designate as your patient advocate. And that's kind of the term for the person that you trust most to speak for you and to carry out your treatment wishes and decisions. A lot of times I get asked, how do I know who's a good patient advocate? And in most circumstances, it's probably a family member. They know you well, they know how you've lived your life, they know what brings you quality in life, those types of things. I have, however, been in a lot of situations where a family member may not be a great patient advocate just because of that emotional connection. In ways in which you can identify whether or not the person that you're envisioning as your patient advocate is a good one is whether they're willing and able to sit down and have a conversation with you about it. So if you, for example, have thought maybe your spouse or your adult children are the folks who you feel would be good patient advocates, if they're having a hard time talking with you about it, they're not ready. And a good example of that is my own husband. He's not my patient advocate because it's not something he's comfortable talking about. He's a banker and I get it. And so my best friend is my patient advocate at this stage in my life. And he's certainly going to be part of those conversations, but I've really put her in a position to make some of those tough decisions if something were to happen. And so as you're thinking about who you would trust most as your patient advocate, make sure that they are willing to follow your instructions, even if they may disagree with them, or even if it may result in allowing you to die. Those are really difficult decisions. So on top of being a nurse at the hospital, I'm also one of the ethics consultants. And so I'm often consulted to have a lot of these difficult conversations where there might be multiple family members that disagree, or we have a situation where we have an advanced directive, or we have loved ones that are really saying, gosh, mom would never want to live this way, but I can't make that decision. It's too hard. And so we can help work through that. But it's really hard. It's even hard when you have a plan, right? Because saying goodbye is never easy. What we hope that advanced care planning does is at least take that burden off of your loved ones, feeling as though they're making a decision on your behalf, because ultimately what they're doing is they're telling us what you would say because you're no longer able to tell us. And so hopefully that takes that burden off of them of feeling like they have to make that decision. So again, when you're thinking about who is a good patient advocate, make sure that they're willing, that they're strong enough, they've got that emotional stability, if you will, to be put in a difficult situation, and have those conversations with physicians and nurses and other loved ones, and at times people who may disagree. So where do you begin? So a lot of times what people have historically done is just grab the advanced directive and sat down and started filling it out. And I really want to encourage you to do that as the last step. The first step should really be thinking about kind of what's important to you, and recognizing that you should be having these conversations multiple times throughout your lifetime. So even when you fill out the advanced directive, you're really not done. You really want to talk about those types of situations because things may change and most likely will change as you age, or as circumstances happen in life. In ways in which you can facilitate those conversations with your loved ones is using personal experiences that you've been with your own loved ones. I'm sure we've all known somebody close to us that has died, or that may have had a chronic illness, or cancer for that matter. And using those experiences to really talk about them can help you identify what's most important to you. So when we're talking about considering how you are going to have these conversations with loved ones, I want to encourage you to refrain from using a couple phrases that I hear all the time that are really not very helpful. And an example of one is a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, I don't ever want to be a vegetable. And I kind of pause and say, well, gosh, well, what if you're a fruit? Because to say you don't want to be a vegetable doesn't really tell us anything. So what do you think about if somebody were to say to you, I don't want to be a vegetable, and you were in a position to have to be kind of the person to carry out their wishes? Would you know what that means for that person? What do you think about when someone says they don't want to be a vegetable? Can you throw any examples out there? Brain capacity. Okay. Yep. And that can be a wide range of things, right? And so again, some of those terms that we hear a lot, they're just so vague that we often find ourselves more confused. Another phrase that I hear people say a lot is just, my wife knows to just pull the plug. And I go, oh gosh, what if there's no plugs to pull? Right. I've even seen a funny commercial where she walked over and unplugged the TV. So again, what does that mean? So if you find when you're having these conversations with your family or even your doctors and nurses, really kind of explore in what circumstances would you say my quality of life is significantly impacted if X, Y, or Z were to happen, or if I weren't able to recover from, X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. And the other term that I often hear too is quality of life. And that is a very personal declaration as far as, what brings me quality could be very different to each and every one of you in the room here and on the Zoom call. And so really define what are those things that bring you quality. And I'll give you a little bit of an example just using myself, and I'll try not to get teary because it happens every time. But, at this stage in my life right now, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old at home, and they are my life right now. My husband and I often say we're like in the sweet spot. They still like us. We still like them. They aren't quite getting into too much trouble yet. Nobody's driving, all of that stuff. So we're in a really good place. And I've often said, gosh, if something ever happened to me where the doctors were saying, I'm not going to recover my ability to be able to interact with my children, or even recognize my children, I feel that pit right here. That is a significant impact on my quality of life. And if it were a circumstance where I would be in a position like that, my patient advocate knows very well that I would want to be allowed to die naturally in that regard, and that I wouldn't want any aggressive medical care to keep me alive. And that again is just an example of describing my circumstance. So think about those types of circumstances that you may find yourself into with regards to what brings you quality of life. And I even joke, well, down the road, I may not be all that upset if I don't recognize them because they're making me mad as teenagers. Who knows? I'm not there yet, right? But maybe someday I will. And so just think about that when you think about those things that are important to you. The next topic that I want to talk a little bit about is life support. Again, I hear a lot of times people say, well, I don't ever want to be on life support. And again, it causes me to pause because medicine has a lot of really great things, great advances, great technology that we utilize to get people better and get people well and help them live a lot longer. And I'd argue a lot of that is life support, right? And so when you think of life support, what are some of the things that come to mind? What do you think about? Breathing machine. Yeah. Yep. Can anybody think of anything else? Feeding tubes. Sometimes. Yep. Dialysis. Sometimes people even go as far as saying blood products and antibiotics and so on and so forth. So again, it can be a wide range of medical interventions that could fall into this category. And so again, I really encourage people to refrain from using the term life support. The breathing machine is the number one example that people usually give me. And I'll tell you, the breathing machine is probably one of the most easiest medical interventions to get people off of, if it makes sense. So like I said, I was an ICU nurse for many years. I cared for hundreds of patients who were put on a breathing machine because they weren't well. They weren't breathing well enough, but they put on a breathing machine, they get better and they come off, right? And they do just fine, right? They're absolutely normal. But there are circumstances, though, where an individual may be so ill to begin with or frail to begin with that we should question whether or not a breathing machine is going to be able to get them better. Right. And that is where I feel like it's in that small kind of window where I feel people say, well, I don't want to live on a breathing machine my whole life. And so maybe instead of saying, I don't want to ever be on life support, talk about when, under what circumstances would you say, I wouldn't want to be on a breathing machine? And because I've heard a lot of, especially with COVID recently, we had a lot of people who really said, oh, I don't ever want to be in a breathing machine, and as we learned a lot more about it, we figured out how to help people in those circumstances. So just be cautious about, when you're referring to life support. And the other thing I want to talk about is CPR and do not resuscitate orders. And I think it's important to talk about this because number one, there's a page that references CPR in your advanced directive that you will be asked to choose what you would want. But number two, it's most often misunderstood. CPR is a life-saving medical procedure. It's a giant procedure that we do a lot of aggressive medical intervention. And one of the tools that you have is the guide to CPR. So for those of you who'd like to learn a little bit more about CPR, read through this guide. It's certainly not intended to scare you with those images, but it's to really paint the picture of what it is like, because unfortunately, I think majority of people believe what they see on television. And that is so far from reality that I wouldn't want people to assume that that's how it happens in the real world. When individuals need CPR, like I said, it encompasses all of these aspects of medical intervention and life-saving procedures. If somebody found themselves in a position where their heart stopped breathing and their heart stopped beating and they stopped breathing, that is when CPR would be indicated. And if CPR wouldn't be started, you would die. The other part of CPR that's important to know is the success rate is pretty low. And so, for example, I'm just going to read this statement here on this form, just so you know. It says, for people who are in a hospital, the success rate for CPR is 15%. Which means if 100 people were given CPR, 15 of them would live and 85 of them would not survive. So it's very important. Again, I'm not trying to talk you one way or the other. I just want people to be informed about what CPR is. Because we certainly wouldn't want you to undergo treatment that's you wouldn't want or that you wouldn't find beneficial for you. So you'll also find on here individuals who say yes to CPR versus individuals who say no to CPR. So read through that. The important part is, though, if you are an individual who says, I don't want CPR if my heart stops beating or I stop breathing, then you would have what's referred to as a do not resuscitate order. And that's what a do not resuscitate order means. It says we will not do CPR, period. Now, if you are somebody who, let's say you have a heart attack or you have a stroke, and you have a heartbeat and you're breathing, we are going to provide aggressive medical care to treat you, to get you better. And the common misunderstanding with do not resuscitate is that we aren't going to treat those types of other circumstances that you have. And that is not true. So do not resuscitate does not mean do not treat. So I want to stress that. Yes, question. Yeah, if you have questions right now pertaining to what we're talking about, sure, go right ahead and ask them, and then I will repeat them so the folks online can hear them. But go ahead and ask now. Great question. So the question was, if you're in a car accident and EMS shows up, how do they know whether you have a DNR order or not? So one of the aspects that go along with the do not resuscitate order is a medical alert bracelet. So once you get a do not resuscitate order completed and it's signed by your doctor, you're instructed to hang it on your refrigerator. But to your point, if you're out going for a walk or you're in a car accident, they don't know that it's on your refrigerator. That's why we encourage you to wear the medical alert bracelet. And you can get those online. Even some of the pharmacies here in town have those. But that then, because EMS knows to look for that bracelet, because it also tells them if you've got any other medical conditions like allergies to medications or maybe even a seizure disorder, they know to look on your wrist to see what important information they need to know, and a do not resuscitate order is there. Now, if you choose not to wear the bracelet, they're going to resuscitate you. Yeah. Correct. So a do not resuscitate order is different than the advance directive. So if you're in a car accident, so the other question was, how do they know you have an advance directive, right? In the very back page of that directive, you'll see a wallet card. And that wallet, because usually, if you can't talk, if EMS comes to where you're sick and you can't talk and tell them what's going on and there isn't a loved one there to tell them, they're going to usually rummage through your purse or your wallet to figure out what's in there. And if you've got that wallet card in there, boom, they know right away who your doctor is, who to call. So this is why we need you to also, I'm hopefully empowering you to get all of these tools in place as well. Because we can only do what we know, if that makes sense. So if we didn't know you had a do not resuscitate order, the default is to do it until we find out otherwise. Another question, yes. Great question. So the question was, what if you are overseas or maybe even another state? Will they honor them? Great question. And I can certainly only speak for Michigan. I will tell you there is a national POLST, which stands for Physician Order of Life for Life Sustaining Treatment, a national organization that does help partner with each individual state, because each individual state has their own laws regarding do not resuscitate orders. And so we would hope that if somebody showed up in a hospital in another state and they have a Michigan do not resuscitate order on, that they would honor it. I know we would do that here at our facility, but like I said, I can't necessarily speak to those other states. But if you are somebody who, let's say, lives half the year, in Florida and half the year here, just make sure when you're that state that you're going to or that you're spending that time in will honor it, or whether or not you need a separate do not resuscitate order in Florida when you're in Florida. Yeah. So the question is, would that apply overseas? And again, some other countries have very different legislation than we do in the United States and even within their own territories. So if you're planning to take a 3-month travel somewhere internationally, I would do a little bit of homework on finding out, what their rules are regarding do not resuscitate orders for out of country visitors, and see what they are, just so you can get those things in place ahead of time. Yes, you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
There is a question on Zoom, or they want to know if this is a good or a bad idea. They said, I want my paperwork to say if I will be a burden to my husband, children, or society financially, emotionally, and caregiving, let me go. I need to be a fully functioning, contributing adult. Lying around waiting to die is not something I want.
I would certainly encourage you to write that exactly like that in your advance directive. But the most important part is your patient advocate needs to know when you would define burden, because if we were to just read that at the hospital, it's very difficult for us to know, would this be a situation where you would define it as a burden? And so in most circumstances, a lot of this is going to come down to your patient advocate. So even though you've written it in your booklet, like I said, Michigan has a patient advocate statute, and your patient advocate gets to say. And so they would really be driving that, driving the bus in that situation. So really prepare them for when that is. Mm-hmm. Great question. Yes. Yep. Great question. So the question was, can your patient advocate be out of state? Absolutely. They can be out of the country. Because the most important part is you choose who you trust most. And it may be somebody who lives in Germany. And nowadays we're getting really good at virtual conversations. And, a lot of times we are having conversations over the phone because that person isn't physically present. So yes, that should not impact who you choose as your patient advocate. Question. Yes, because so the question was, do you carry that information in your wallet as well? So it says right on your wallet card who your patient advocate is and what their phone number is. So just make sure we always have the right phone number. And I can't stress that enough. We get so many documents that have no phone number in them, which makes it very hard for us to know who to call. And those are typically our attorney prepared documents, unfortunately. No, I'm not bashing attorneys. I'm not, but yeah, it was surprising. It's been very surprising when we've done our chart audits. Did you have a question? Yes. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, if I feel pretty confident about who my primary advocate is, there's the strong recommendation to have a second. And now we're kind of wondering, well, who would be the second person? And I absolutely agree. Because what if you and your husband are in a car accident together? Yep. And so strongly encourage a second. You can even name a third. But it comes down to the who. And again, even if you have multiple family members, like I said, family members in most circumstances are the best one. But if you have family members who might not get along very well, or might get hurt feelings if you choose one of them and not the other, you may just want to say, you know what, I'm not going to pick my family members. It's completely up to you. The most important part to what you touched on is their willingness. I often find that we, as kind of the individual saying, who do I want as my patient advocate, make assumptions that this person's going to be burdened. But we really need to ask that person, would this be a burden to you? And a lot of times we find that they're actually honored, because they understand how important that role is, that they're advocating for you. And then that is an honor and not so much a burden. And so just kind of approach them that way. I feel like you're the one I can trust most, but are you able and willing to be able to do that? Because the role entails a pretty substantial job. And again, you may find that someone says, I just can't, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I can't, it's too hard. So kind of play with it that way a little bit. And like I said, if you need to choose a friend, maybe that they would be a better person too. Kind of play around with it. I don't know if you're all getting together for Easter Sunday, but have some conversations and just kind of see, did that help a little bit? Yeah. 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 And that happens a lot. We have a lot of families nowadays that are just very spread out, if not downstate, out of state. And so it does kind of create some complexities, but not necessarily anything that would change what we would do, unless of course that individual is not answering the phone. It does get tricky in those circumstances because we do need them to be willing to pick up the phone and have a call. Yeah. question. It's for any, it's, so the question was, this is not the booklet itself can maybe require that your patient advocates have to have a lot of time to talk to the healthcare team to make decisions. And so the purpose of the advanced directive is if you are ever in a position where you are unable to do that. If you are always capable and able of making your own medical decisions, we don't even need to look at your booklet. This booklet only becomes applicable after two physicians have made the determination that you can't make your own decisions and that now we need to go to your patient advocate. So we hope that, you know, you're always going to be healthy enough or well enough to be able to do that. Yes. So even if it's not, so the question or the example given here in the room is, let's say you were in a car accident, you're not dying, you're not at end of life, but you're kind of out of it enough that, you know, we still have to take care of you and come up with a plan. And maybe that results in living in a facility for a short period of time for rehab. Yes, your patient advocate is the one who steps into that role to do all of that. Because remember, you would be in a situation where you can't make your own decisions. And that's the primary key, whether you're at end of life or not. And that's why I said early on, we've unfortunately said this is really only about end of life, but it's really not. It's really about circumstances where you cannot tell the doctors and nurses what you want. And so we have to go. Yeah, exactly. And so we need to know who you trust most to be your voice, because you can't tell us. Yeah, sure. Yeah, just like they would, just like you, if you were needing a new medication, you would be the one having a conversation with that provider. Well, because the patient now doesn't understand or is unable to have that, you kind of step into that role of the extended patient, if you will. Perfect. Yeah. No. And that's why that, you know, and that's a good point. So let's say, you know, you're in the car accident and you're incapacitated for a period of time, but you get better. Once you get better and you've regained your ability to make your own decisions, we don't have to contact the patient advocate anymore. You now become the driver of that bus. Now, we certainly encourage, though, your patient advocate to be part of those conversations, you know, but again, that's not driven by us as healthcare professionals. That's really driven by you. We want your advocates to know kind of what you've been through and would this circumstance now lead you to make different decisions and so on and so forth. So making sure that they are aware of that. Just communicate. Yeah. Which unfortunately we're not good at in this world. Yeah. Question. So the question is if you were in a car accident and you didn't have two physicians, you know, there or able to make that decision, that would be in an implied consent situation because it's an emergency. So typically those emergency situations are, it's implied consent that we're going to treat you, get you better. And once we get you stabilized, then we can have the time to really, you know, look through or maybe even get somebody else to say, hey, I've got the swallow card. Can you give this person a call? Kind of thing. But especially if you're unresponsive, it's pretty obvious that you're incapacitated. And, That's a great question. There's a privacy code, but in an emergency situation, though, we haven't given anybody a privacy code because typically everybody has, because of HIPAA laws, everybody has a privacy code, and anybody who calls and wants to get information has to have that 5-digit code. And if they don't have that 5-digit code, we don't give them information. Right. That's what I was just going to say. In an emergency situation, it's a little bit different because of the emergent nature of the situation. I can honestly say we don't do the greatest job of, if the person's listed as the emergency contact or even the patient advocate in the booklet, really doing any kind of identifiers to say that this is the right person we're talking to. But that might be something we could certainly look into. I'm not aware, and I've been there a long time, I'm not aware of a situation where somebody has pretended to be somebody that they weren't. As far as a patient advocate, that's a role I certainly don't want to have if I don't know the person. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I've never experienced a circumstance like that. It's usually typically what we run into is it's somebody who's not been named as your patient advocate that really wants to take charge of the decisions. And that's where we really have to say, unfortunately, you aren't listed as a patient. We find a nice way to say it, but we have to really rely on the people that are named in the booklet. So try to work that out before you become hospitalized too for us. Great questions. Anything else before I go on? Okay. I do want to touch on a couple more things with regards to CPR and DNR orders. So since we've talked a little bit about them. So like I said earlier, if you're somebody who says you don't want CPR, you would need a do not resuscitate order. There's two kinds in Michigan, just the standard Michigan do not resuscitate order under the Do Not Resuscitate Procedure Act. And there is now also the MyPost. I do have examples of those up here. What I do want to stress to you is that these are considered out of hospital do not resuscitate orders. So you fill these out, your doctor signs them, you put them on the refrigerator, you hopefully wear your medical alert bracelet, and these are valid outside of the hospital if 911 were to be called. If, let's say, something happens to you, 911 is called, they come into your home and they see you have this on your refrigerator, they'll grab it, take you to the hospital. These are advisory in the hospital. So it does not mean that you have a do not resuscitate order in the hospital, which is referred to as a code status. So again, we want to make sure that while you're in the hospital, again, you'll have a conversation with your treating doctors and nurses and make a determination as to what you want your code status to be in the hospital. And that would mean that if you chose not to have CPR, then you would have a do not resuscitate code status, and they would put a purple armband on you in the hospital. But let's say you don't have these out of hospital orders and you at some point in the hospital determine that you do not want to be resuscitated. Once you leave the hospital, if you don't have this out of hospital DNR order, 911, they have to resuscitate you. You have to have this medical order. Otherwise, so don't assume that if you had a do not resuscitate in the hospital that it follows you everywhere you go. It doesn't even follow you for your next admission. It's every admission, every patient has to choose a code status. And then ideally, if circumstances change and you have one of these out of hospital medical orders that you and your primary care doctor or whoever your treating physician is, whether it's, hospice doctor, oncology doctor, whatever it may be, updates these periodically as changes happen. Does that clarify that a little bit? Because those do not resuscitate orders can be very confusing. Hey, good. Yeah. Great question. So the question was, what medical circumstances, do people typically have that would warrant or even, maybe have them consider a do not resuscitate order. So like I said, on your guide to CPR, CPR is a great medical procedure, and typically people do well if they're young and healthy. Like a football player, he had a great recovery, right? Our chronically ill, frail people don't have those types of outcomes. It really is up to you as to whether or not you want to go through CPR or not. But typically what we see are individuals who have chronic illnesses, certain types of cancers, maybe that are more aggressive cancers where they have a life-limiting illness, or maybe the illness is going to lead to a shortened life expectancy. And those folks kind of lean more on, I want to have the best quality of life that I can with the time that I have left and not necessarily live as long as I can. And those are typically the folks that say, I don't want CPR. And I just want to die naturally. That's the other thing. Those folks who feel fairly strong about just letting kind of nature take its course are typically people who say no to CPR. Great question, though. Okay, so let's move on. So in the workbook, you'll find in the middle sections there on pages 5 and 6, some worksheets. So if you're kind of stumbling on how to have these conversations with your loved ones about what is meaningful to you, what kinds of circumstances would impact you, I encourage you to fill out these worksheets, because I think every one of us has a hard line in the sand where we would say, this is a situation where I would not want to live this way. And instead I would want to be allowed to die naturally. And so this worksheet allows you to really say, like, what makes life worth living for you, or barely worth living. And it can help really facilitate a conversation. And then even with the treatment wishes worksheet, certain scenarios where you would say, do you agree or disagree with this scenario in regards to your own self and your own care? If you fill those worksheets out, I strongly encourage you to rip them out and add them to your advanced directive. The nice thing is you can add as many pages to your advanced directive that you want. I had mentioned the Prepare for Your Care directive online. Another great one that has great scenarios that you can go through if you choose to use some of those pages, add them to your advanced directive. I've even had patients that literally wrote out really beautiful things about how they wanted to be cared for if they were in a situation where they're so sick or they're so ill and perhaps maybe even unlikely to recover. So it really helps guide us as healthcare professionals, but more importantly, the family who are facing these difficult circumstances and maybe having to make some tough decisions. Also use those worksheets as tools to have conversations with your loved ones. So allow them to ask questions and say, well, geez, Mom, you checked the box that you disagree here. That sounds pretty harsh. I want to learn more about that. So use those as tools in that regard. And then last but not least, we are all going to eventually get to a point where we die. In Western society, it sometimes seems as though death is optional. It is not optional. The difference is how we all get there. And so really thinking about and having some of those harder conversations with your doctors and nurses and your loved ones about, what worries you most when you think about your end of life? What do you worry about? What do you fear most? What past circumstances have you experienced that maybe influence how you would make decisions for yourself? Even as far as, even though it's very difficult for healthcare professionals to, tell somebody how much time they have left, we can certainly sometimes narrow it down to maybe months or weeks or days. In some circumstances, just depends on the situation. But, if somebody were to tell me I had 3 months left to live, I would make some fairly significant changes right now because of that time. So again, kind of exploring that a little bit with those people caring for you. And then more importantly is that transition from living to dying. Because dying isn't just a moment in time, it's a process. And depending upon the circumstances, it can take months for some people. Other people, it can take weeks to days. And so there's that transition period. So when we're living, our body needs, all that hydration and nutrition and all of that other stuff. But when we're in the dying process, we have to be mindful that if we continue to do those things, it could put somebody in a position of harm in the the studies have shown really like our patients who have dementia, putting feeding tubes in individuals with dementia is worrisome in some situations because depending upon where they are kind of on that sliding scale of dementia, especially if they're on that more advanced stage, we worry that it's causing them more harm than good because their body's in that process of dying. And so they're not processing all of the stuff we're putting into it. And then last but not least, we are going to switch over to the directive, but I want to pause here and see if anybody has any questions about what we've talked about before we jump in to filling out the advanced directive. Question? Yes, go ahead. Yes. So the question was, if you have a DNR for the DNR orders, when you're in the hospital, you have to make that determination on every admission, and that's correct. But outside of the hospital, if you have this out of hospital DNR order, correct, they don't expire. So once you've filled one out, they're effective immediately. And the only way that they are no longer effective is if you've revoked them, or if for some reason, there's reason to believe it was executed inappropriately or it's not valid. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So next, let's go to the advanced directive. So this is the big stuff. This is the legal document. And like I said, Munson uses the Making Choices Michigan document. There are others out there. So find one that speaks to you, that you can connect with. But this is the one that we use. So the first few pages within this booklet are purely informational for you. So there's FAQs on here. The one thing that I want to show you at the bottom of page 2 is what do I do with the form once it's completed? And so you'll find those instructions down there as far as getting a copy to one of the one of the hospitals that if something were to happen to you that you'd most likely be taken to. Your doctors would want a copy of this, your patient advocates, whoever else it is, but you keep the original. So do not give that original to anybody. You keep it and keep it in a safe spot because you may need to make some modifications to it down the road. And then the medical terminology, which we talked a little bit about already. So let's start by starting on page 4, and the page numbers are really hard to see because they're in that little brown banner down there at the bottom. But the first page is advanced directive, says at the top, durable power of attorney for healthcare or patient advocate designation. Down at the bottom of the page is where you're going to fill out the information for whose advanced directive this is. So I don't know if any of you are in a position where you might be a patient advocate for a loved one or a family member and you're helping them fill this out. You can certainly fill this out for them, but you need to make sure that they're of sound mind and that they understand what's going, but their writing might not be very legible. So you'd fill out whoever this is for down at the bottom. Any questions on that page? Okay, next page is choosing your patient advocate. So now we've really talked about, who would make a good patient advocate, why we all need one. This page also describes, what will happen if you don't choose one and what will your patient advocate need to do in case they are asking. So your information is filled out at the top, not your patient advocate. So that's your information. And then when you turn the page, this is where you're going to write who you trust most to serve as your patient advocate on page 6. Now, the very top of this page does have a section that does allow you to identify whether you have a religious belief that prohibits a doctor from doing an examination on you. So if you do, you'll want to check that top box. If not, you can just leave that top section blank. But again, like we said earlier, you can name up to 3 people. The first person is your primary patient advocate. And then you have a first alternate and a second alternate. There is a hierarchy in how this works. And so if the person you've named first is unavailable or unwilling to serve as your patient advocate, then we would go to the next. So they don't necessarily work collaboratively, although I have seen some directives where the patient has written in on the side that they have to act jointly. And in those circumstances, just work hard to make sure they all are in agreement. They all understand, because nothing makes this job more harder than when the people you name as the ones you trust most don't agree. So it can make it a little complicated. Any questions on this page? Okay, page 7 is the most important page, but the page you need to save for the end, because your signature requires 2 witnesses. So make sure that you have 2 witnesses with you who watch you sign it, that they say, that you weren't forced to sign it, that these are your decisions, and that they meet the requirements. So this is the page that we most often get the errors on, which makes the document invalid. So none of your patient advocates can serve as a witness. No family members can be a witness. No healthcare employees can be a witness. No insurance provider can be a witness, and nobody who's going to benefit from your death can be a witness. So it's a pretty long list. So find some friends, find some neighbors. I even tell people, go to the bank, ask a couple of the tellers to serve as your witness. I do want to draw your attention, though, to the very top of the page, which talks about giving expressed permission to your patient advocate to make decisions to withhold or withdraw treatment, which would allow you to die, and that acknowledging that such permission could result in your death. So you need to designate whether you agree with giving your patient advocate that permission or whether you disagree with giving your patient advocate that permission. And in situations where you disagree, we may have to pull in a third party if you are in a situation where there's reason to believe that withholding or withdrawing care could result in your death. Any questions on that page? It's usually the court, usually. We have an ethics committee that we can lean on, but in those circumstances, especially if they've given express permission to not, we'll go to the court to get it. If the court feels that that's appropriate or in your best interest, I should say. Yeah, so some of the circumstances where it's typically traumatic injuries, like a car accident or something along those lines, or any kind of neurological. So sure, coma, it's so rare to see somebody in a coma like that anyways, but it'd be circumstances where maybe somebody was in a bad car accident and they're just not getting better. And now we're having so what we call multiple organ failure. So especially if it's a young person, we can keep people alive on machines for a long time. The question becomes, would they want to live that way? And if we have reasonable medical certainty that would suggest that this person isn't going to be able to survive outside of the hospital, that's when we start to question, well, should we be doing this then? Tough. Yeah. That happens all the time, especially, if you're on a ventilator, we sedate you. I shouldn't say induced coma, but we want to keep you comfortable. A lot of times you're in the hospital because you're really sick. You're either in a lot of pain. So sometimes the pain medication can make you a little sleepy. But in order to give you the treatment that you need to get you better, sometimes it requires, putting you to sleep a little bit, so you can rest. And sometimes we don't know, right? We don't have crystal balls. And so we need that time to know if you're going to get better. And that's why I really encourage, okay, this is plan A, but once we reach a point where plan A isn't maybe going the way we hoped, we need a plan B. And what would plan B look like? And to your point, it could be a situation where we're either not getting better or maybe we're having additional setbacks. And so really sitting down with the people who know you best to say, what would she say right now? If she could sit up in this bed and we were to say to her, she's not getting better, what would she say? And in some instances, we'll have family members that'll say that, would tell us, well, she'd say, why bother? Let me go. And we have other family members that would say, give it another week or give it, so just really depends on those individuals' personal values and what they find most important, but also the family members really telling us who you are. Because we don't know, and we really lean on family or patient advocates. 70% of our patients don't have these. And so it makes it really hard to, when you have multiple family members. We hope they're all in agreement, but sometimes these stressful situations really, we hope they bring out the best in people, but sometimes they bring out the worst. And everybody copes differently to stress. And so it's really hard. It's really hard. Yeah. Yeah. Because she was probably too sick. Oh, yeah. Okay. Be home. Yeah. So the scenario was there was a couple who wanted to allow their loved one to die at home, but they couldn't get them out of the hospital. I'm repeating this for the people online. And in some situations, sometimes people are so sick that we couldn't safely get them home. They die en route. So in those situations, we really keep them in the hospital so that the family can come to them and be with them. Especially if we feel as though just transporting them they're not going to make it home. It's tough though. Depend. Yeah. You never know. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the signature page? I think that was pretty clear about that. Good. So the next 2 pages then are for your patient advocate. So in Michigan, your patient advocate must sign acceptance to the role. And on page 8 there, you'll see a big list of kind of what their responsibility entails under Michigan law. And then they have to sign acceptance there on page 9. So at the very top of page 9, it's your name that you are assigning the patient advocates listed below. So again, whoever you've named as the first person as your patient advocate, then your successor, first alternate and successor. I will tell you though, especially for those of you who may have a patient advocate who's not local or maybe out of state or maybe even out of the country, by not having this signed, it does not invalidate the document because they have to sign acceptance when they're called upon to act. So it's better to have something on file that tells us who you've chosen, and then we know who to call. And at that time, we can say, you've been designated as the patient advocate. Are you accepting of this role? Then we can get them to sign it then. And the only reason why I say that is because I see a lot of people who don't turn these in because they're waiting for their patient advocate to sign it. And then something happens. And now we have nothing, right? And it could be a situation where we never have to activate this because you're always able to tell us. So again, I don't want you to not get a copy on file, because once you do get their signatures, we can update your records to make sure it's on there, but that part doesn't invalidate it. Correct. Yep. Or just fax it to you and then you make a photocopy of the whole thing again and then, and then get us a copy. Or you can direct them to the website here and go, hey, on this website, print this page off, sign, section 2 or option 2 and send it over to me. And nowadays your smartphones, they have that little scan option on there now, which is so great. You can text it back and forth that way as well. But so if you are someone who says, I just want to designate a patient advocate, you're done. The remaining pages of this booklet are optional. We certainly encourage you and recommend for you to fill them out, but you don't have to. Because like I said, at the end of the day, your patient advocate is going to be the one that's going to tell us what to do. And even if, let's say in this booklet, you check a box that you don't want CPR and your patient advocate says, yes, do CPR, we can certainly explore a little bit more about why they feel you would want CPR, even though you said no. But at the end of the day, they're the ones you trusted most. So they're the ones that get that say. So just keep that in mind. And the other reason why I say this is because sometimes I have patients who might have mild to moderate dementia where all the rest of this stuff is just very confusing and hard for them to figure out. So we'll just do the patient advocate. Easy peasy. But I am going to go through these pages with you so you know. So page 10 is the preferences for spiritual, religious, and end-of-life care. So at the top part of this page, you can specify what your treatment preferences are, or excuse me, what your religious faith or beliefs are. So if you are affiliated with a particular congregation or religion, you can write that in there. If you have a particular spiritual support person, you can write their name in there as well. The bottom section where you have, where it says, I want my healthcare providers to know these things about my religion. Some examples of that I've read in some of my patients is I had a patient who had written in there that she wanted to make sure she got her oh gosh, what's it called? Next rights. What's it called? Last rights. Yes, she wanted to make sure she got her last rights. I had another patient who write in, she wanted to make sure she always had her rosary in her hand. So just little things like that. Sometimes the little things are the big things in people's lives. And so the more you write in here, the better for us to know. Or you could choose not to complete the section and just leave it blank. At the end of your life, this is kind of a two-part box. So at the top, you can specify where you prefer to be cared for. Again, I've seen people fill this part out a couple different ways. One, they rank it. So sometimes they'll write number 1 is in my home. Number 2 is in a long-term care facility. Or I've seen people just write, in my home. So completely up to you. And then the second part of that is, would you like hospice services in any of the above settings? And so the nice thing with hospice is they go to wherever you call home. But I do want to pause here and make sure everybody knows the difference between palliative care and hospice care. They're two very different things that are often misunderstood. And so I want to take an opportunity to clarify that for you. So palliative services is a type of medical subspecialty, much like a cardiologist or a nephrologist. So they specialize in caring for patients with life-limiting chronic illness. So illnesses that we know are going to be burdensome for some people, maybe not be curative, congestive heart failure, COPD, even kidney failure. So those are patients that would benefit from palliative care because palliative care works alongside their other doctors to help them with symptom burden. Maybe it's medication side effects for individuals who have cancer, and palliative care can work alongside them to help manage kind of the side effects of the medication. Palliative care you can have at any stage of an illness. And they are, like I said, a subspecialty group. So doctors, nurses, social workers, clergy, so on and so forth. Hospice, on the other hand, is again another type of subspecialty, but they primarily focus on individuals who have a shortened life expectancy, typically a year or less, or 6 months or less. Usually hospice eligibility occurs when we wouldn't be surprised if the individual were to die in the next 6 months or so. And so the primary focus under that type of specialty is comfort. They really want to give you the best quality of life with the limited time that you have left. So really going to focus on trying to keep you out of the hospital if they can, really refraining from doing a lot of the aggressive, kind of sometimes painful medical interventions or treatments. So really just focusing on keeping you comfortable with the time you have left. I think sometimes why they get confused is because usually your palliative care specialists are also your hospice specialists. So even though they have two different focuses, they're the same group. So Munson obviously has a wonderful palliative care program and a hospice program, but there's other options out there. I know there's end palliative in the community as well. There's Hospice of Michigan. So lots of options. So again, pick what really speaks to you in those types of situations. Any questions about palliative or hospice care?
We did a program, I think last year, or the year before, on hospice, and I'm pretty sure it was recorded and it's on our YouTube channel too. So.
Excellent. Yeah. It's so misunderstood. And honestly, a lot of studies are really showing that people who enroll in hospice early actually live longer than people who enroll in hospice way too late, where they only have a couple days or 7 days left to live. And gosh, just really that quality of death is just as important as quality of life in a lot of circumstances. So the other thing, again, you have a space down here at the bottom inside that at the end of my life box where you can write special things in. Just, again, some examples. I've had people write in specific music that they wanted playing or hymns, poems that they wanted read. I've even seen instances where somebody had written in, "Do not let my sister in the room." Okay. Again, very important for us to know, right? So we don't ask questions. We just need to know.
That page is a lot like 5 wishes. as well.
Yeah, kind of. Yep. Yep. So a little bit different, but yes. Yep, exactly. Next page is pretty straightforward, organ donation. So if you are already registered under the Michigan Donor Registry and have that little heart on your driver's license, you're going to check that top box. If you don't, but you're not opposed to donating organs, you're going to check that second box or second space, whatever you want to call it. You may be somebody who's not necessarily registered with the donor registry, but you do authorize your patient advocate to donate certain organs except some. So an example I'll give you is I had a patient once who said, "I'm just going to be a little too weirded out if somebody gets my eyes. So I can't give away my eyes." Okay, write that in here. So again, everybody has their own things, right? So write those in there. Or you may say, I don't want to donate any organs and choose that second to last option there. The very bottom, you also can make arrangements to do whole body donation, but you do have to do that ahead of time. And you can pretty much go to Google and type in whole body donation in Michigan, and a whole list of major universities will pop up that you can have your body sent to after you've died. Any questions about that? Yeah, a couple hands. Always. You can't assume that your parts aren't good. And the number one organ that I think people overlook is skin. So we don't have a burn unit up here. We send a lot of our burn patients downstate, but skin is a huge organ that those patients need. And I don't think people think about. And I'll tell you what, the transplant, like the advances in transplant is through the roof right now. Like, it's just amazing to me, some of the things that they're transplanting faces now, they're transplanting uteruses now for infertile women. I mean, it's amazing what they're doing. Yeah. Yeah. Except, yep, you can. Yep. Yep, you got it. Yep, you can be as specific or as vague as you want. Because again, we just, we don't know what's going on in that circumstance, and they, they'll use what they can. And if they can't use certain parts, they won't. Obviously the larger one, hearts and lungs are. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Question. That's a good question. So for those folks online, there was a question of if they had their whole body donation arrangements out of state and now live in Michigan, what do we do? And I would certainly encourage you to reach out to the institution that you were going to donate your body to and ask them, what I need to do, especially if you still want your body to go to that organization, then it would be important to know how to get you there at that time. Or like you said, do you want to change the institution where you would want to be donated? Yeah, because it's same thing here in Michigan. It's not through the hospital. It would be whatever organization, unless of course, if you died here in the hospital, then we would, work with your patient advocate to get you where you wanted to be. But a lot of people don't die in the hospital. So it's just a matter of where you're going to be that time. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, next page then is preferences for anatomical gifts. We already did that. This is just the autopsy page now is the next page. So if you are somebody who would accept an autopsy, if it would help your blood relatives understand the cause of death, sometimes we don't really know why somebody has died. Then that would be that top option. I have been told that there is a fee associated with that. So set that money aside. I've been told about $3,000. Or you may say you would accept an autopsy if it could help the advances of medicine or medical science. So again, if maybe you have a rare condition that they're still really learning about, and you would say, sure, they could have my body after I die to see if it would help. Or you may say, no, I don't want an autopsy. And that would be that third option in that case. Any questions? Yeah, so the question was, if you were the victim of a crime, how is this page impacted by that? And that's why you'll see on that third option, it says if optional. So if it's a medical examiner case related to a crime or, an unexpected death or unanticipated death, it will be required that you have an autopsy by the medical examiner. So that's why it says if optional. Yeah. Okay, next page then is treatment preferences, goals of care. So at the top of that page, we're on page 13, you'll write your name and date of birth. And this is a section where we're going to talk about treatments to prolong your life. But the most important part of this page is that bold sentence that's in that box. And I want you to imagine yourself in that situation, and then that's how you should answer this page. So if you reached a point where there is reasonable medical certainty that you will not recover your ability to know who you are, where you are, and you would be unable to meaningfully interact with others, then make that choice. So if you imagine yourself in that situation, would you say option 1, I want all possible efforts to prolong my life, even if it means I remain on life-sustaining equipment for the rest of my life? Or would you say number 2, which is where you would want the healthcare team to try to prolong your life for a period of time, but if they found that that treatment wasn't getting you better, was not improving your current condition, or it was causing you more pain and suffering, then you would want it stopped and you would be allowed to die? Or would you say 3, I do not want to start treatments to prolong my life, and if they had been started, you would want them stopped? So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions. That's kind of it's a loaded scenario, but I think what I appreciate is the simplification of, in most instances, we're going to provide you with care to prolong your life. But where it gets a little trickier is if you're at a point where we're wondering, there's reasonable medical certainty that you're not going to get better, that you're unable to have meaningful interactions with others. That's where we kind of go, gosh, are we in a space now where they would or wouldn't want to be kept alive? And so that's where I appreciate that. Just imagine yourself in that situation and not any other situation. What would you say? If you choose 2, that's typically where I see most people choose is 2, that they want the treatments to try for a period of time. What I strongly encourage you to do is discuss with your patient advocate when you would say stop, because they may have a very different, idea of what pain and suffering is, or getting better is. So have a conversation with them about, well, what would you define as getting better? Or what condition would you say, is worth continuing to push for, to make sure that we're giving you the time that you need. And if any of you have ever been in these situations, that, it's not the way that this typically happens is it's lots of conversations over a period of time. So you're meeting with lots of doctors, lots of nurses. It's not a, hey, we're going to call you up and you got to decide then. So I hope that gives you a little bit of peace of mind in regards to that. Any questions on that page? Okay. And then the last page is the CPR page. And so we talked about this earlier. Like I said, if somebody needs CPR, it's because their heart and breathing has stopped. And would you want the medical team to try to bring you back? And if you say yes, you would still want CPR. That's that first option. If you say you want them to try to bring you back, unless you have any of the following. So you have an injury or an illness that cannot be cured or that you are actively dying. There's no reasonable chance of surviving the CPR attempt itself, or there's little chance of surviving long-term. And it would be hard and painful for me to recover from CPR. So we're really good at doing CPR and getting you through CPR. It's the aftermath, because typically people have broken ribs. There's usually loss of independence after a CPR attempt. And there could be some brain impairment because of lack of blood flow to the brain. And again, this little flyer spells it all out here on the back as far as risks of CPR. So just read through it to, again, make sure you're making an informed decision. And I encourage you to have these conversations with your doctors. Encourage them to initiate that conversation. It saddens me to have to say, a lot of times you're going to have to start the conversation. We're not very good at that because we're reactive to what is in front of us versus proactive sometimes. So really encourage us to have those conversations. Or you may say, if your heart and breathing stops, that you don't want CPR, but instead you want to die, you want to be allowed to die naturally. So that's that third option. The big thing I want to stress, even if you click that third option, this is not a do not resuscitate order. Okay. This is a treatment preferences, something that we would talk about with your patient advocate as a tool to say, hey, I see that she checked the box. She doesn't want CPR. That to me tells me that she would want to be a DNR as her code status in the hospital. Let's talk about that a little bit more. And then you can write in additional specific instructions here. Like I said, you can add, there's not much space there, so you can add as much additional pages as you want, the worksheets that are in the workbook. Some examples of things that I've seen people write in here. I've seen some people write, under no circumstance would I ever want a feeding tube. I've seen some people write, I would never want dialysis, whatever it may be. Just know that a lot of those medical interventions that we recommend, we hope that they're temporary. Even dialysis can sometimes be temporary if you're having, an acute circumstance, and dialysis might be able to get you through it, but which would be the plan A. But then it'd be important to talk about a plan B. What if things don't go the way we hoped? And then what would your decisions be? So, last page so then you would sign the bottom. That's your signature and date. The last page is specific to mental health choices. Because that is considered a very vulnerable population, there needs to be added protections for them, which also means that they have to give specific permission to their patient advocate. So these are folks who have, schizophrenia, bipolar, personality disorders, who are diagnosed with a mental health illness, not dementia or Alzheimer's. I get that question a lot. That's not considered a mental health illness, even though there's that cognitive impairment. So again, go through here. If you are somebody who has a mental health illness, what do you give your patient advocate permission to do on your behalf? Should you find yourself in a situation where you can't make your own decisions? And so would it be to consent to outpatient therapy, voluntarily admission to the hospital, involuntary admission to the hospital? Typically that will involve a petition by a psychiatrist, any types of specific medications or therapies. And you can write all of that in there, or again, you can choose not to complete this page if it is not applicable to you. Last but not least, you'll find the wallet card on the very back. Oh, sorry, Bob, did you have a question? The 30-day revocation. Okay, so for those online, the question was about the 30-day revocation. So where this comes in handy, because sometimes when folks have mental illnesses, they can be exacerbated. Even just something as simple as having a cold can kind of exacerbate their illness, which at times places them in a position where they're really making irrational statements or even comments, because anybody that you've named as your patient advocate, you can revoke that at any time. So let's say I name my husband, I come in the hospital, I can say, nope, I'm revoking my husband at any time. This 30-day revocation gives the healthcare team 30 days, even if that individual says, nope, I don't want my husband making decisions for me. If it's related to their mental health illness, it gives us 30 days to treat that patient and then see if they kind of come around. So that's what that 30-day revocation, they're giving up 30 days of revoking that patient advocate. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times it's the mental instability that's kind of caused that. Yes. Yep, great question. So the question was, can the patient advocate revoke that responsibility? Yes, at any time. So that's why it's important to have a second person, because it might be, and I just had one a couple of weeks ago. The son was named as the primary advocate. He just said, I live in Ohio. This is too hard for me. My sister's the second person. I'm going to revoke mine. Please go to my sister. She's right next door. Okay, easy peasy. But yes, they can revoke anytime. Okay. So again, wallet card, fill it out, cut it out, laminate it if you can, stick it in your wallet in case something happens. We're going to rummage right through it. Make sure you keep the original, make copies of them, get them to the people, in the places that most need them, and then update them. So we typically use the 5D rule, which again is kind of listed in the workbook itself. So anytime there's a significant diagnosis, anytime there's a decline in health, anytime there's a death of one of your patient advocates or a divorce, and every decade of your life, we really want you to update your directive. Nothing causes me to pause more when I pull up an advanced directive in a patient's chart and it was executed in 1991. I kind of go, oh, geez. So a lot might have changed by then. Are these still their wishes? So, keeping them updated is certainly encouraged. Any questions? I hope I covered any questions that you may have had, but I'm willing. Yes. I have lots of extras you can take with you. Yep, sure. Yep. And like I said, they are available on the website to print off. You just got to have a printer and they're like 15 pages. So, but yep, I can give you some. Yeah. National Post, POLST. Yep. And it's just pulsed.org. It's a great website. It's a great organization. I'm actually the state of Michigan's representative for that organization, but they are the ones that really work on those out of hospital medical orders. So the do not resuscitate orders, but they take it beyond that to it for an individual who might want to further limit aggressive care, like intubation or, getting taken to the hospital. They can specify within that order. So this is what the Michigan one looks like. Physician order for life sustaining treatment is what the National Post is, but Michigan is referred to as a My Post, which is the Michigan Physician Order for Scope of Treatment. And that falls under that same paradigm. Any other questions? Right on the dot. Look at us. Right on the dot.